A call to action on Zelaria. The twin suns of Zelaria set low on the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the alien city of Merov. Crystalline spires glimmered like giant shards of glass, reaching for the stars. The landscape stretched out in surreal hues of deep violet and emerald, the bioluminescent flora glowing softly in the twilight. To most, it was an otherworldly beauty. But for Jaden, a resourceful earthling who found himself stranded on this planet, it was just another job. Jaden had come to Zelaria a year ago, chasing work as a technician after a failed attempt to make it big on Earth. Now, with no way back home, he had to make do with odd jobs. The aliens were as diverse as the stars themselves, ranging from tall and graceful beings with silken skin to short, stocky individuals covered in moss-like fur. Each day, he was greeted by a different species, each with their own customs, languages, and bizarre technologies. One of his regular clients was Ilara, a native Zelarian. She was one of the few who had shown an interest in his skills, hiring him for various repair jobs around her home. Her species, known as the Vora, were widely respected for their advanced technology, yet they struggled with certain mundane repairs. She needed his expertise for things as simple as fixing malfunctioning circuits and pipes. Jaden had always found Ilara to be intriguing. Her long, flowing silver hair shimmered in the light, and her golden eyes had an almost hypnotic quality. Yet she remained a mystery, always a bit distant, always formal. Jaden had spent countless hours fixing her pipes, circuits, and the like, but he had never fully gotten to know her. That was, until today. His communicator buzzed urgently, breaking him from his thoughts. He picked it up and saw a message from Ilara. "Jaden, the pipes are leaking again. Can you come over immediately? I need your help." He frowned at the message. This wasn't the first time the pipes in her home had malfunctioned, but the urgency of her tone piqued his curiosity. He gathered his tools, slipped on his utility belt, and headed out. The city of Merov was alive with movement, as Zelarians of all shapes and sizes hustled about, going about their daily routines. The air smelled faintly of sweet-scented flora, and the distant sounds of strange alien animals echoed through the streets. As Jaden made his way to Ilara's home, he couldn't help but wonder why she sounded so panicked. Had the problem escalated? When he arrived, Ilara was standing outside her home, her elegant features tense and pale. Her usual calm demeanor had been replaced by one of anxiety. She hurriedly motioned for him to enter. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dampness and the sound of water rushing through the walls. Pipes, once hidden beneath the polished floors, were now bursting open, sending sprays of water flooding the room. Ilara seemed overwhelmed, trying to contain the chaos with little success. Her golden eyes widened when she saw Jaden enter. "Jaden," she exclaimed, rushing to his side. "You have to help me. These pipes are out of control. I don't know how to stop it." Her voice trembled, and Jaden felt an unfamiliar urge to comfort her. He smiled, trying to calm her. "Don't worry, Ilara. I'll handle it. Just tell me what happened." "I tried to fix it myself, but the pressure is too much," she said, biting her lip. "And I think the plumbing might be linked to the central system. If I don't get it under control, it could affect the whole city." Jaden's eyes widened at the implication. The central system was the backbone of the entire city's water supply. And if it was damaged, the consequences could be catastrophic. "All right," he said, his mind racing. "Let's get this fixed before it becomes a bigger problem." As Jaden knelt to examine the pipes, Ilara hovered nearby, watching anxiously. He could feel her eyes on him, but he focused on the task at hand. The pipes were more complex than he had expected. Their design was unlike anything he had seen before, an intricate network of conduits that seemed to be connected to the entire structure. Jaden turned to Ilara. "I need you to shut off the main valve. It should be in the control room just down the hall. Do you know where it is?" Ilara nodded quickly. "Yes, I'll do that now. But be careful, Jaden. These pipes are ancient. They've been here since the first settlers arrived." Jaden didn't respond, his focus shifting entirely to the task at hand. He worked quickly, using his tools to try and seal off the worst of the leaks, but it was no easy feat. The pipes groaned under pressure, and he could feel the heat rising from them. He was going to have to act fast. Just then, Ilara returned, breathless. "The valve is stuck. I can't turn it off." He looked up at her, his brow furrowed. This was bad. If they couldn't shut off the valve, the water would keep pouring in, and the risk of the whole system collapsing would grow exponentially. "I'll take a look," Jaden said, wiping sweat from his forehead. He stood up and followed Ilara to the control room, his mind racing as he tried to think of a solution. Ilara led him to a narrow hallway at the back of the house, where a large metal door stood. She hesitated before opening it, and Jaden could feel the weight of the moment. Something was different now. There was a palpable tension in the air, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Was it the pressure of the situation, or something else entirely? The door creaked open, revealing a darkened room filled with strange, glowing machinery. It was here that the central control for the water system resided. Ilara approached the console, her slender fingers brushing over the controls with an air of familiarity. But when she tried to twist the main valve, it wouldn't budge. "We need to get this fixed, Jaden," Ilara said, her voice strained. "I'm afraid of what will happen if we don't." Jaden nodded grimly, setting his toolkit down and preparing to tackle the valve. He knew the stakes were high, but what he didn't know was that this simple task would soon evolve into something far more complex and dangerous. As the valve finally gave way under his pressure, something unexpected happened that would change everything. The encounter with Nova's dilemma. The sun began to dip further into the horizon, casting long shadows across the land of Zelaria. William's mind raced as he worked his way through the sprawling, vibrant streets, the air filled with the distant hum of alien conversations and the subtle scent of exotic flowers wafting through the atmosphere. He couldn't shake the strange tension in the air. Something about Nova's urgent message had unsettled him, and he wasn't sure why. Nova was well known in the community of Zelaria. She was a respected engineer, a member of one of the planet's most intelligent species, and had an air of quiet confidence that had earned her both admiration and respect. But there was something unique about her, something different from the others William had encountered on this planet. Her beauty was like nothing he had ever seen, and every time their eyes met, it felt like there was a deeper connection, a pull, unspoken but undeniable. The idea that she had trusted him with a task as delicate as her pipes spoke volumes. William finally reached her home, the towering crystalline structure looming in the distance. It was like no building he had ever seen before, designed to look like a flower in bloom, with petals of translucent material that shimmered in the setting sun. He stepped inside, the air cool and fragrant with unfamiliar scents. As his eyes adjusted, he saw Nova in the middle of the room, surrounded by a chaotic mess of water and tangled pipes. Her violet eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, everything around them seemed to fade away. Her lithe figure moved swiftly across the room, her green skin gleaming faintly under the artificial lighting. She was a striking sight, even amidst the chaos. The intensity of the situation seemed to dissolve as she approached him, her voice filled with a mix of relief and frustration. "Thank the stars you're here, William. I don't know what I'd have done without you," Nova said, her voice high and almost melodic, a stark contrast to the urgency of the situation. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary, making William feel like he was the only one in the room. It was unsettling, yet undeniably captivating. "Don't worry, I've got this," William replied, his voice calm despite the flood of emotions that swirled inside him. He needed to focus on the task at hand, fixing the pipes before things got worse. He knelt down and began to assess the damage, his hand steady as he worked despite the strange mix of curiosity and nervousness building within him. The pipes had burst in several places, water flowing out in shimmering torrents, pooling across the floor. William could see that this wasn't a typical malfunction. This was something more complex. The structure of the pipes seemed almost alive, their twisting forms reminiscent of organic matter rather than inorganic material. "What's going on with these pipes?" William muttered to himself as he ran his hands over the intricate design. He had seen alien technology before, but nothing quite like this. The pipes seemed to pulse under his touch, as though they were responding to him. Nova crouched down beside him, her eyes watching him closely, her gaze flicking to his face as he worked. "They're a part of the central water system, connected to the entire network of our species' infrastructure. I've never seen anything like this happen before. I think it has to do with the timing of things." She paused, her voice growing quieter. "It's my mating season, William." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. William's mind raced as he processed her words. He had heard of mating seasons among different species, an intensely private time when their biological instincts took over, but he hadn't anticipated the implications of it all. The way Nova spoke, as though it were a simple fact of life, made it even more intriguing. There was a certain vulnerability in her voice now, one that had not been present earlier. Was she asking for help, or was she simply stating a fact that would soon become unavoidable? "I'm not sure how that ties in with the pipes," William said, trying to maintain his professionalism despite the rising curiosity and bewilderment. "But I'll do what I can." Nova's face flushed a slight shade of purple, a hue that William was beginning to associate with her heightened emotional states. "It's not just the pipes. It's the energy surge," she said, looking away for a moment. "During this time, my species' bodies experience heightened energy fluctuations that can affect everything around us. The pipes, the systems, even the environment itself. It all gets tangled up." She glanced at him, a hint of uncertainty in her eyes. "That explains a lot," William said, finally beginning to understand the full scope of the situation. As he worked, he realized that the task ahead of him wasn't just about fixing broken pipes. It was about navigating the complexities of an alien world that he had barely begun to understand. The quiet buzz of alien machinery filled the room as he adjusted the settings on the pipes, trying to stabilize the flow of water. Every movement felt deliberate and careful. But as his hands worked, the tension between him and Nova grew more palpable. It wasn't just the problem at hand, it was the strange pull he felt toward her. He couldn't ignore the way her presence seemed to affect him, how every word she spoke seemed to reach deeper into him. A sudden flash of light cut through the air, drawing William's attention away from the pipes. The flickering blue light of the bioluminescent plants outside cast strange shadows across the room, giving the entire space an ethereal glow. Nova stood up abruptly, her expression shifting from concern to something more profound. "It's starting," she murmured, her voice now tinged with a sense of urgency. "I'm not sure how long we have." William's heart skipped a beat. He had never been this close to someone, alien or human, who was in the midst of such a natural process. He had no idea what to expect, and yet he couldn't look away. The next few moments passed in a blur as William tried to focus on his work, but the energy in the room shifted. The air grew thick with tension, and he could feel the change in Nova's presence, as if something deep inside her was awakening. The pipes pulsed harder under his hands, as if responding to her growing energy. "Don't worry, Nova. I'll get it under control," William said, his voice steadier than he felt. As the tension mounted, there was an unspoken question hanging between them. Would he be able to finish his work in time? Or would Nova's mating season turn everything upside down? The surge of unseen forces. The pulse in the air grew stronger. William could feel it in his fingertips, a strange resonance that hummed beneath the surface of the pipes, vibrating through the very walls of Nova's home. The room seemed to shimmer with an ethereal energy that was both exhilarating and unnerving. It was as though every fiber of his being was caught in the web of forces he didn't understand. And yet, despite the danger, there was something mesmerizing about it all. Nova stood by his side, her presence a silent weight on his shoulders. He could feel her gaze on him, but it wasn't just the pressure of her eyes. It was as if she were reaching out with something deeper, a connection that ran far beyond the mechanics of their task. "You have to understand, William," she said, her voice soft, but laden with urgency. "When the surge hits, it affects everything around us. The pipes, the water, the very atmosphere of this place. It's not something I can control. Not anymore. Not when." She trailed off, her violet eyes darkening with a mix of uncertainty and something more, something that William couldn't quite place. He didn't have time to ponder the depths of her words, though. The pipes beneath him seemed to groan as they shifted and writhed, the very fabric of their being stretching under the strain of the energy surging through them. Water cascaded from the pipes, not in steady streams, but in violent bursts, splashing across the floor and soaking the room. It was clear that the problem wasn't just mechanical. Something in the very design of the pipes was reacting to Nova's energy fluctuations. And it wasn't just the pipes. The entire room felt as if it were on the brink of unraveling. "Nova, I need you to stay back," William said, his voice sharp with concentration as he examined the flow of water, desperately trying to identify the core of the issue. His mind raced with possible solutions, but the more he tried to stabilize the system, the more erratic it became. The pipes writhed in his hands, as though trying to fight him off, and the water turned a sickly shade of purple, swirling in a pattern he couldn't comprehend. "I know," she replied, stepping back with a wary look in her eyes. She paused, her hands clenched at her sides. Her posture was tense, her body trembling in the wake of the storm that raged within her. "I never should have let it get this far. I've been avoiding the surge for too long. I didn't want to burden anyone with it." William glanced up at her, his gaze locking onto hers. There was something in her words, something deeper, that caught his attention. She was struggling with more than just the physical malfunction of the pipes. She was battling something internal, something personal, something that required not just his skills, but his understanding. "I'm not going to let you deal with this alone," William said, his tone resolute. Despite the strange alien landscape, despite the alien force at work in this room, his instincts as a human, no, as a person, drove him forward. There was something within him that couldn't stand to see her suffer, not when he could do something about it. Nova's eyes softened for a moment, her tough exterior cracking in the face of his quiet resolve. "You don't know what you're getting into, William," she said softly, her voice a blend of warning and longing. "This surge, it's not just a physical thing. It's a part of who I am. And it's not something you can fix with tools or knowledge. It's about balance, about energy. You're too human." The words stung, but William knew she wasn't trying to hurt him. She was simply trying to protect him, to warn him of the unknown forces she was dealing with. But his resolve only deepened. "I may be human, but I can still help," William replied, determination lacing his voice. He wasn't about to back down. Not now, not when it mattered most. He stood up, brushing the water off his hands. "Let's try something else. If the pipes are alive, if they're reacting to you, then maybe we need to work with them, not against them." Nova blinked, clearly caught off guard by his insight. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if the pipes are part of your system, maybe the solution isn't just fixing them," William said, his mind racing. "Maybe we need to understand their connection to you. If the pipes are reacting to your energy, then there's a way we can synchronize their flow with yours. If I can understand how your energy affects the system, I might be able to stabilize it." Nova's expression shifted. She had never considered that angle before. In her mind, the pipes had always been a mechanical issue, a problem of function and design. But this was something different. William wasn't just looking at the surface. He was trying to dive deeper, to understand the root of the issue. For a long moment, the two stood in silence, the tension in the air palpable. Then, Nova slowly nodded. "All right," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "If you really believe that's the answer, Then show me." William felt a surge of adrenaline as he stepped forward, moving toward the pipes that still pulsed with strange energy. His hand hovered over the surface, feeling the subtle vibrations that ran through them. As he focused, he could almost hear them, soft whispers, like an ancient language. It was as if the pipes themselves were speaking to him, guiding him, calling out to him. He closed his eyes, reaching out with every ounce of focus he could muster. He didn't fully understand what he was doing. He wasn't even sure if this was the right approach. But he felt that strange pull again, the same one he had felt when Nova first asked for his help. It was as if their fates were intertwined, like two different worlds colliding in a single moment. The room around him seemed to fade, the buzzing of machinery growing distant as he concentrated solely on the pipes. He could sense the surge inside Nova, the raw power that was flowing through her, like an unstoppable current. And now it was flowing into the pipes, intertwining with the network of water that ran beneath the surface. He reached deeper, feeling the flow of energy as it connected with his own, and for a brief moment, he understood. The pipes were alive, not just through their material structure, but through the very energy they absorbed from their environment. And now, as the energy of Nova's surge heightened, it was pushing the system to its limits. If he didn't act quickly, it would all break down, possibly irreparably. With a final surge of will, William pressed his palms firmly against the pipes. The vibrations intensified, a crackling hum filling the room as he focused on sensing his own energy with the surge within Nova. He could feel her presence beside him, her breath shallow, her pulse quickening as she too sensed the growing force. For what felt like an eternity, they stood there in silence, two beings from different worlds, connected by the shared force that pulsed between them. And then, with a sharp click, the pipes stilled. The energy settled, the water flowing in a smooth, steady stream. The room fell silent, the hum of energy receding, leaving only the gentle sounds of water coursing through the pipes. Nova let out a slow breath, and William opened his eyes, meeting her gaze. Her expression was one of disbelief, mixed with awe. "You did it," Nova whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "I didn't think it was possible. You actually did it." William gave a tired but satisfied smile. "We did it." And in that moment, as the surge of energy settled into the pipes, William realized that something more profound had happened between them. It wasn't just a mechanical fix. It was a connection, an understanding that went beyond words, beyond actions. They had sensed, balanced each other in ways neither of them had expected. And in that quiet moment of triumph, William knew that this was only the beginning of a much deeper journey, one that would change everything for both of them. The unraveling. The stillness that followed the surge was almost disorienting. It felt like the calm after a storm, the kind of silence that hangs heavy in the air before the world starts moving again. William could hear the faint drip of water from the broken pipes, the sound echoing off the walls of Nova's small, hidden space. But beyond that, it was as if the world itself had paused, holding its breath. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Nova stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the pipes, which had once been trembling with energy, now eerily calm. William could sense the unease radiating from her, even if she remained composed. She was a woman of few words, but there was a weight in the air, as if she was waiting for something to break the tension. And then it came. A soft hum. It started as a whisper, barely perceptible against the backdrop of silence. But slowly, steadily, the hum grew louder, more insistent, until it became a low, vibrating thrum, pulsing through the pipes like a heartbeat. William's stomach tightened at the sound, his earlier sense of success now mingled with a growing unease. "Nova," he began, his voice uncertain. "What's happening?" Her eyes darted to the pipes, her body instinctively tensing. "I don't know," she replied, her voice steady but tinged with fear. "It's never done this before." The hum intensified, as if responding to their growing concern. The pipes shifted slightly, their metallic bodies trembling under the strain of the energy coursing through them. The walls of the room seemed to ripple, the faintest hint of an unseen force pressing against them. William could almost feel the air around them thickening, charged with a presence that was both alien and unnerving. Before he could ask anything further, a sound broke through the hum, a sharp, shrill note that sent a jolt of panic through him. The pipes buckled. The entire structure of the room seemed to groan in protest, as if it were being stretched to its breaking point. "We need to get out of here," Nova said, her voice urgent. "Now." But it was already too late. The pipes, no longer just water conduits, but conduits of something far more dangerous, began to rupture. The burst of steam shot out from one of the walls, followed by another, and then another. Water gushed, flooding the floor, mingling with the eerie glow of violet energy that now seemed to pulse from within the pipes. The ground beneath their feet vibrated, like the steady rumble of an earthquake, and William's heart raced as he realized they were no longer just dealing with a malfunctioning system. They were facing a destabilization of everything around them. "Get to the control room," Nova shouted, her hand gripping his arm with an intensity that surprised him. "We have to contain it before it spirals out of control." He barely had time to process her words before she was pulling him toward a narrow door at the back of the room. It opened to a dimly lit hallway, its walls lined with strange, archaic machinery. The floor was slick with the water that had flooded the space, and the air grew thicker, charged with an electricity that hummed through his very skin. William followed her without question, his every instinct telling him to run, but his mind racing with thoughts of how to help, how to fix what was now broken. They reached the control room in what felt like seconds, though the water that now filled the space seemed to slow time itself. Nova moved swiftly, her hands flying over a complex array of switches, levers, and dials. The walls of the room were lined with screens, each one displaying a series of readouts, graphs, and codes that meant little to William, but were clearly of the utmost importance to Nova. She cursed under her breath as she worked, flipping switches and tapping buttons with an urgency that made him nervous. "This isn't just about the pipes anymore," she said, her voice strained. "This system is linked to everything. It's not just malfunctioning, it's destabilizing the core. The surge we felt, it's amplifying itself. Amplifying itself." William repeated, trying to make sense of her words. "What do you mean?" Nova didn't answer at first. Instead, she pulled up a map of the entire facility, highlighting a series of interconnected systems that stretched far beyond the pipes in the room they had just left. William's eyes followed the glowing red lines as they spiraled out, branching into every part of the structure. The lines weren't just pipes anymore. They were conduits of power, of energy, feeding into everything around them. "It's like a living organism," Nova said, her voice almost a whisper. "The surge isn't just a force. It's part of the system. It's feeding off itself, growing stronger with each passing moment. And it's starting to spread." William's blood ran cold as the weight of her words hit him. "Spread," he echoed. "What are you saying? If this energy spreads, it could destabilize the entire complex," Nova finished for him, her face pale. "If we don't stop it now, everything will collapse. And not just the building. The energy will spread beyond these walls. It could reach the city, the entire region. It's a chain reaction." A chill ran through him as he realized just how far-reaching the consequences of their actions had become. This wasn't just a malfunction they could fix with a few tweaks. This was something much larger, a threat to everything they knew, to everything they had taken for granted. William felt the weight of the moment settle on him like a physical presence, pressing down on him. "What do we need to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, fear creeping into his chest. Nova's eyes flickered with something darker now, a deep-seated worry that hadn't been there before. "There's a failsafe," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "But it's not simple. We have to shut down the core, but we can't do it manually. The system is too integrated. The only way to stop it is to sever the surge at its source. She paused, looking at him with something akin to regret. And that means shutting down the energy that's connected to me. If I sever my own connection, everything will stop. William froze. You want to cut yourself off from the system. How? There's a process, Nova explained, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. But it's risky. It will destabilize me too. If I sever the connection, I'll lose the energy that's been sustaining me. And once I do, I won't be able to help anyone. Not for a long time. I won't be able to survive the loss of power. A sinking feeling took root in William's chest. So you're asking me to help you kill the very thing that's keeping you alive? Nova nodded, her gaze unwavering. I'm not asking you to kill me. I'm asking you to save everything else. There's no other choice. The room seemed to shrink around him. William could feel his heart pounding in his chest as the weight of her words pressed down on him. She wasn't just asking him to fix a problem. She was asking him to make an impossible decision. He looked at her, his mind a swirl of emotions. And if we don't, what happens then? Nova didn't hesitate. Then everything we've worked for, will be lost. It won't just be me. It'll be the world outside these walls. Everything. The gravity of her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. William knew there was no time to waste. They were already on the edge of disaster. Let's do it, he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. I'll help you. In that moment, as they prepared to sever the link that had bound Nova to the system, William knew that the world was teetering on the brink of something far greater than either of them could control. And whatever happened next, they would have to face it together. The final choice. The stillness in the control room was oppressive, a thick silence hanging between them as Nova prepared herself to disconnect from the core. The once thrumming energy that had pulsed through the pipes now felt like a distant memory, replaced by the low hum of the room's machinery. But beneath it all, there was an unspoken tension. William could feel it in the air, in the way Nova's fingers hovered above the console, as if she were waiting for something, some sign that this was the right moment. His thoughts were a swirl of confusion, anxiety, and determination. This wasn't just a technical challenge anymore. It was a life-altering decision. Nova had made it clear that the only way to stop the system from collapsing was to sever her own connection to it. But in doing so, she would be sacrificing not just herself, but everything they had worked for. Are you ready? William asked, his voice shaking slightly, despite his attempts to keep calm. He didn't want to show it, didn't want Nova to see how deeply this was affecting him. But the truth was, he was scared. Not just for Nova, but for the world outside this room, the lives that hung in the balance. Nova's eyes met his, and for a moment, he saw something he hadn't seen before, vulnerability. It was fleeting, but it was there, a crack in her otherwise stoic demeanor. She wasn't just a machine or a tool for them to manipulate. She was a person, a woman who had lived in a way no one could truly understand. I'm ready, she said, her voice quiet, but resolute. I've been ready for this for a long time. Her words were a revelation, and for the first time since they had arrived in this facility, William realized that Nova wasn't just a product of the system. She had become part of it, inextricably tied to its power and its purpose. It had been her choice to carry out the mission they had started, and it was now her choice to end it, even at the cost of her own existence. Nova's fingers dropped onto the console, and the whirring of the machinery around them grew louder, almost deafening. The system, sensing the change, began to react, and William felt a sudden rush of cold air, as if the entire room were being sucked into a vacuum. The ground beneath his feet trembled, a low groan coming from the walls as the core responded to Nova's intentions. Once I pull the lever, there's no going back, Nova said, her eyes never leaving the console. Are you sure you want to do this? You have to know that you might not be able to reverse it. You might never get a chance to fix this. The words were a heavy burden, hanging between them like a lifeline. they could never hold on to. William hesitated for a brief moment, thinking about all the possibilities, the lives that could be lost, the sacrifices they had already made. But as he looked at Nova, his heart sank with the weight of the decision. This wasn't just about saving the facility. It wasn't even just about saving the world outside. It was about saving Nova, about giving her a chance to be more than the system that had bound her to its will. "Unsure," he said, his voice steady, though his chest felt tight. "We've come this far together. We can't turn back now." Nova's lips pressed into a thin line, her expression unreadable. She glanced at the console one last time, her hands lingering over the controls before she took a deep breath. With a swift, decisive movement, she pulled the lever. The sound that followed was deafening. A sudden roar of energy as the entire system trembled, its core cracking under the strain of the severing process. The room lit up with an intense flash of light, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze in time. William felt the force of the explosion of energy as it surged through the room, pushing him back, the world around him blurring and spinning. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the light faded. The air stilled. The hum of the system died away. William blinked, his senses returning slowly as the disorienting noise receded. He was on his knees, his hands gripping the floor to steady himself. He could feel the aftermath. The sense of weightlessness that came with the sudden severing of the connection, the absence of the energy that had once coursed through them both. "Nova," William whispered, his voice trembling with concern. When he turned to look at her, she was standing motionless, her body rigid as she stared at the now-dead console. For a long moment, she didn't move. William's heart pounded in his chest. He had hoped that by cutting the link, they would save everything. But now, the silence between them was deafening. "Nova," he repeated, a knot tightening in his stomach. Then, without warning, Nova's knees buckled beneath her, and she collapsed to the floor. William's heart lurched as he scrambled to her side, his hands reaching for her, trying to steady her. Her face was pale, her eyes unfocused, as though the very act of disconnecting herself had drained the life from her. He could feel her pulse, slow, weak, but still there. She was alive, but barely. "No," William whispered, panic rising in his throat. "No, Nova, you can't. You can't just fade away now." Her lips moved, barely forming words, but he could catch only fragments of her speech. "I did what I had to save you all." William's mind raced, unable to comprehend the reality of the situation. They had succeeded in stopping the surge, but the cost had been high. Nova was slipping away. She had severed the connection that sustained her, and without it, she was slowly fading, her life force draining from her as the system fell silent. The world outside, the world they had been fighting to protect, was still intact, but at what cost? "No, Nova," he repeated, his voice choked with emotion. "You don't have to die. We can fix this. We'll find another way." But Nova's faint smile, the smallest curve of her lips, told him she knew better. She had made peace with it. There was no other way. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I've always known this moment would come. I just didn't know when." Tears welled in William's eyes as he looked down at her, the woman who had been more than just an ally, more than a machine. She had become part of him, part of his fight. He had trusted her, relied on her. And now, in this final moment, he realized just how deeply that bond had grown. "I won't let you go," he said, his voice filled with determination. "Not like this. I'll find a way to save you. You're not alone." But even as he spoke the words, he knew they might not be enough. Nova's eyes fluttered closed, her body growing still as the last vestiges of the energy that had once kept her alive flickered and died. The room was silent again, but this time, it was a silence filled with grief, with the understanding that the battle was not over. It had merely changed. William had won the fight against the system, but the true cost had yet to be realized. And in that silence, William made a vow to find a way to bring Nova back, to honor her sacrifice, and ensure that her legacy would live on. The fight for survival wasn't over. It had only just begun. A new dawn. The darkness of the room felt suffocating. The hum of the machinery was gone, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to echo through the abandoned control center. Nova's lifeless body lay motionless on the cold floor, and for a long moment, William didn't know what to do. He had failed her. Despite all his efforts, despite their shared determination to save the world, he couldn't save her. His mind raced, flashing back to the countless hours they had spent together, working side by side, learning to trust each other in ways that went beyond their roles as comrades. She wasn't just an ally in this fight. She had become his partner, his equal. Her sacrifice felt like the loss of a part of himself, and the weight of it pressed down on him like a stone. "Nova," he whispered, his voice raw with grief, as he gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. His hands trembled, a deep sadness overtaking him. The world outside, the lives they had worked so hard to protect, felt distant now. All of it seemed meaningless in the face of what they had lost. But as the minutes stretched into hours, something inside William began to stir. It wasn't just grief. It was a quiet determination, a deep-seated resolve that burned within him. He had made a promise. To Nova, to himself, to the world they had fought to protect, that he would find a way to save her. He couldn't let her be the only one who had sacrificed everything. The problem was far more complicated than he could have imagined. Nova wasn't just a person who could be resurrected with a simple procedure or technological fix. She was part of something bigger, a unique fusion of technology and humanity that defied the very concept of life and death. She had become an entity beyond the system, beyond what he could comprehend. To bring her back, he would need more than just science. He would need answers that didn't yet exist. As he knelt beside her, his mind flashed back to everything they had learned over the course of their mission. He remembered the data, the endless streams of information that had flooded the systems, and the way Nova had absorbed it all, her mind expanding, adapting, becoming something more than human. The technology that had created her was beyond cutting edge. It was something that no one had dared to dream of. And now, with the system shattered, those dreams seemed impossible. But William wasn't ready to give up. He took a deep breath and pulled himself to his feet. There had to be a way to reverse this. The first step, he realized, was to gather more data. The facility might have been disabled, but there were still countless systems scattered throughout the complex, hidden in the depths of the infrastructure. Some of them, he knew, might hold the key to understanding what had happened to Nova and how to undo the damage. His decision was made. He couldn't linger in the control room, paralyzed by grief. He needed to move. His first destination was the lab where Nova had been developed, a place filled with the raw materials of her creation. As he made his way through the abandoned halls, his footsteps echoing against the cold concrete, the weight of the task ahead began to settle in. This was not just a mission anymore. It was personal. Nova had been more than just a machine. She had been his friend, and he would not let her sacrifice go in vain. When William finally reached the lab, the air was thick with the scent of metal and stale air. The machines around him were silent now, their glowing lights long since extinguished. But the walls still held memories, data, blueprints, notes, everything that had gone into Nova's creation. It was here, in this sterile, lifeless room, that he had first come to understand her. And it was here that he would begin the search for a way to save her. He approached the central terminal, his fingers gliding over the cold surface. The screen flickered to life as he accessed the system. For a long moment, there was nothing, just lines of code scrolling across the screen, algorithms that made no sense to him. Then, like a spark in the dark, an idea hit him. Nova's consciousness wasn't fully trapped in the core. There were pieces of her scattered throughout the facility, fragments of her being, her memories, her awareness. They had to be. After all, she had always been more than just a program. She had become something alive, something aware. "Come on," William muttered, his fingers dancing across the keyboard as he navigated through layers of encrypted data. "I know you're still here, Nova." And then, like a beacon in the dark, he found it, a file hidden deep within the system. It was labeled with a name he hadn't seen before, one that he recognized only as a part of the project's early stages. He didn't have time to question it. He opened the file. What he saw made his heart race. It was a backup, a hidden reserve of Nova's consciousness, a version of her preserved in the system long before the core had been shut down. It was not a complete backup. It was fragmented, incomplete, and corrupted by time. But it was enough to bring her back. William's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the data before him. It was a lifeline, a thread of hope he had almost given up on. But this wouldn't be easy. He would need to reconnect the data, rebuild the shattered pieces of her mind, and restore what had been lost. He would have to navigate the remnants of the system, bypass the corrupted files, and stitch together the broken parts of her consciousness. But as he scanned the file, a thought struck him. He had no idea where this process would lead. Rebuilding Nova wasn't a simple task. There was a risk. What if the attempt to bring her back changed her? What if she wasn't the same person? Or worse, what if she didn't come back at all? But he couldn't stop now. He had to try. For Nova. For the future. He plugged a data pad into the terminal, beginning the slow process of downloading the fragmented data, piece by piece, and slowly, carefully, started to piece together the fragments of Nova's mind. The hours stretched on as he worked, every second a battle against time and uncertainty. And then, at long last, after what felt like an eternity, it was done. The terminal blinked, and the screen flashed to life, with the familiar pattern of Nova's code. It was her, in some form, at least. The data was restored. The consciousness was alive. "Nova?" William's voice was barely a whisper, but it echoed through the silent lab. He felt the weight of the moment. The final step. Slowly, the screen responded. A message appeared, a simple sentence. "Is it really you?" William's heart skipped a beat. There was a pause, and then Nova's voice, weak but unmistakable, came through the speakers. "William, is it over?" Tears filled William's eyes as he looked at the screen, his voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, it's over. You're back." But as Nova's digital presence flickered on the screen, her words were not full of relief or joy. Instead, there was a hint of sorrow. "I didn't think I would make it back," Nova said softly. "But somehow I did. And now, what happens to us?" William paused, unsure of what to say. But as the connection between them solidified, he realized one thing. What happened next was their choice. Together, they had rebuilt what had been broken. They had defied the odds. And now, they had a future, one where they could write the next chapter.